The Texas sun hung low over Bandera County, painting the drought-stricken pastures in shades of burnt orange and gold. Robert Bobby Caldwell stood on the weathered porch of his farmhouse, his calloused hands gripping a letter from First National Bank of Bandera. The paper trembled slightly, not from the October wind that whispered through the dried mesquite trees, but from the weight of what those typed words represented. 60 days. That's all he had left. Bobby was 52 years old, but the past 3 years had carved decades into his sun-weathered face. His flannel shirt, faded from countless washings, hung looser on his frame than it had a year ago. The Caldwell Ranch, established in 1947 by his grandfather William Caldwell after returning from World War II, sprawled across 340 acres of what used to be prime cattle country. Now, the land looked like a skeleton of its former self. Cracked earth, sparse vegetation, and empty water troughs that hadn't seen rain in months. "Dad?" Bobby turned to see his daughter Jennifer emerging from the barn, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. At 26, she had her mother's determined chin and bright hazel eyes, though lately those eyes carried the same exhaustion Bobby felt in his bones. She'd graduated from Texas A&M's College of Veterinary Medicine just 8 months ago, carrying her own burden of student debt while trying to establish a practice in nearby Kerrville. "You okay?" Jennifer asked, already knowing the answer. She'd seen that look before. The same hollow expression her father wore when they'd buried her mother, Patricia, 14 months ago. Bobby folded the letter and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Bank's not budging. Harold Peterson came by himself this time. Not even his assistant. Said the board made their final decision. $180,000 in 60 days. Or they foreclose. Jennifer's jaw tightened. She wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving streaks of dirt from the fence post she'd been repairing. "We can appeal. There has to be. There's nothing left to appeal, Jenny." Bobby's voice was steady, but quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a man has already walked through every possibility in his mind 100 times. "I've refinanced twice. Sold off most of the herd. Your mama's medical bills took everything we'd saved. The drought killed what was left. The medical bills, neither of them liked talking about it, but the truth sat between them like a third person on that porch. Patricia Caldwell had fought cervical cancer for 2 brutal years. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments at MD Anderson in Houston had drained their accounts, taken out additional loans, pushed them to mortgage the land that had been in their family for 3 generations. And in the end, she died anyway, leaving Bobby with a mountain of debt and a hole in his heart that Texas-sized didn't begin to describe. Jennifer climbed the porch steps and stood beside her father, looking out at the land that held every childhood memory she had. The oak tree, where her grandfather had built her a swing. The creek bed, now dry, where she'd caught her first catfish. The riding arena, where her mother had taught her to barrel race. "What about the hay contract with the Bishops?" she asked, grasping for anything. "Danny Bishop called yesterday. They're going with a supplier in Uvalde. Cheaper rates, more reliable supply." Bobby removed his worn Stetson and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Can't blame him. We barely have enough hay to get through winter ourselves." The statistics were grim, and Bobby knew them by heart, because Harold Peterson had recited them during every meeting. The ranch owed $180,000 on the primary mortgage, taken out to cover Patricia's final months of care. Property taxes were in arrears, equipment loans on the tractor, and the baler were 3 months behind. Feed suppliers were demanding cash on delivery. The drought that had gripped Central Texas for the past 18 months had turned the cattle business from marginally profitable to actively devastating. Bobby had started with 60 head of cattle. He was down to 19, and those were looking thin despite his best efforts. The wells were holding barely, but the pastures couldn't support more animals. He'd let go his 2 ranch hands, Carlos Rivera and his son Miguel, 6 months ago. That conversation had been almost as hard as reading Patricia's diagnosis. Good men, loyal men, who'd worked the Caldwell Ranch for over a decade. "I've got some money saved," Jennifer said quietly. "About $8,000. It's supposed to be for setting up the practice, but no." Bobby's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. You've got your own life to build, Jenny, your own dreams." "This ranch is my dream too, Dad. It's our family's legacy." Bobby looked at his daughter, saw the fierce determination in her eyes, and felt his heart break a little more. She'd always been a fighter, just like her mother. Patricia had fought cancer with the same stubborn Texas grit that Jennifer was showing now. But sometimes, Bobby had learned, fighting wasn't enough. Sometimes the world just took what it wanted, and all you could do was try to stand with dignity while it happened. "8,000 doesn't make a dent in 180, he said gently, "and I won't let you sacrifice your future for a past that's already gone." The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the property. In the distance, Bobby could hear the low calls of the remaining cattle. Chester, his 12-year-old border collie, emerged from beneath the porch and settled at Bobby's feet with a soft whine, as if sensing his owner's distress. "There's got to be something," Jennifer insisted. "What about that program Congressman Ramirez mentioned? The agricultural disaster relief? Applied 3 months ago, still waiting on approval, and even if it comes through, Harold says it won't be enough to stop the foreclosure. The bank's already got buyers interested. Some development company out of San Antonio wants to turn it into luxury ranchettes for city folks playing cowboy on the weekends." The bitterness in Bobby's voice was rare. He wasn't a man given to self-pity or anger. He'd been raised by William Caldwell, a man who believed in hard work, fair dealing, and accepting life's hardships with grace. But the thought of his grandfather's legacy, the land William had worked until his hands were gnarled and his back was bent, being carved up into half-acre lots with McMansions and fancy fences, made something dark and resentful stir in Bobby's chest. Jennifer pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. "What about crowdfunding? I've seen people raise money online for what, Jenny? A failing ranch owned by a man who couldn't keep it afloat?" Bobby shook his head. "People have their own problems. We're not a charity case." "Pride doesn't pay mortgages, Dad." "No, but it's about all I've got left." The words hung in the cooling evening air. Jennifer wanted to argue, wanted to shake her father and make him see that asking for help wasn't weakness. But she knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when he'd insisted on sitting with her mother through every chemo treatment, even when Patricia begged him to stay home and tend the ranch. The same one he'd used when he'd refused to declare bankruptcy after she died, determined to honor every debt even if it killed him. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee Bobby had made that morning. The house itself was a testament to 3 generations of Caldwell life. William's army footlocker in the hallway, Patricia's collection of ceramic longhorns on the mantel, Jennifer's rodeo trophies gathering dust on a bookshelf. Photographs lined the walls. William and his wife Dorothy breaking ground on the ranch in 1947. Bobby's father James working cattle in the 1970s. Bobby and Patricia on their wedding day in 1995. Jennifer in her graduation gown from Texas, A&M. Her mother, thin and pale but smiling beside her. This wasn't just land and buildings. It was memory made solid. It was legacy. It was home. "I'm going to check on the heifers in the south pasture," Jennifer said finally, recognizing that her father needed space. "Make sure they've got water." Bobby nodded, grateful. "Take Chester with you. He could use the walk." Jennifer whistled, and the border collie scrambled to his feet, tail wagging despite the heaviness that seemed to press down on the ranch. Bobby watched his daughter and his dog head toward the old Ford pickup, its blue paint long faded to a dusty gray blue. The truck had been his father's, then his, and now Jennifer drove it more than he did. Alone on the porch, Bobby pulled the bank letter from his pocket and read it again, as if the words might have changed. They hadn't. The ultimatum was clear. December 15th, 60 days away, $180,000, or the Caldwell Ranch would cease to exist. He thought about his grandfather, William, who'd survived the beaches of Normandy only to come home and pour every ounce of strength into carving a life from this stubborn Texas soil. William had survived droughts before, the terrible dry spell of the 1950s that had broken lesser men. He'd survived market crashes and sick cattle, and all the thousand small disasters that plague a rancher's life. But William had always had hope. He'd believed deeply and truly that hard work and faith would see a man through. Bobby wanted to believe that. He'd tried to believe it through Patricia's illness, through the mounting bills, through the drought and the dying cattle and the foreclosure notices. But hope was a luxury, and Bobby Caldwell was a man who'd run out of luxuries. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky. Venus, bright and unwavering. Patricia used to point it out during their evening walks, back before she got sick, back when the ranch was thriving and the future seemed solid as the ground beneath their feet. She'd loved those walks, loved the way the Texas sky opened up in all directions, vast and full of possibility. "I'm sorry, Patty," Bobby whispered to the gathering darkness. "I tried. God knows I tried. But I think I'm out of miracles." The wind picked up, rustling through the dried grass, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant rain that never seemed to arrive. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied. Ranger, Patricia's old quarter horse that Bobby couldn't bring himself to sell, even though the vet bills and feed costs were an expense he couldn't afford. Some things, he'd decided, were worth more than money. Bobby folded the letter once more and headed inside. Tomorrow, he'd start making calls. He'd reach out to every contact he had, explore every option, no matter how unlikely. He'd fight until December 15th came and the fight was taken out of his hands. That's what a Caldwell did. That's what his grandfather would have done. But tonight, standing in the kitchen where 3 generations of his family had shared meals and stories and laughter, Bobby allowed himself to feel the full weight of his failure. He was going to lose the ranch. He was going to break the promise he'd made to his father on his deathbed, that the Caldwell Ranch would continue, that the legacy would endure. He poured himself a glass of water from the tap, the pipes groaning with the low water pressure that came with a drought year. Through the window, he could see the dark outline of the barn, the equipment shed with its rusting roof, the cattle pens that used to be full and now stood mostly empty. 60 days. Bobby turned off the kitchen light and headed to bed, though he knew sleep would be slow in coming. It had been that way since Patricia died. Long nights filled with worry and memory, the empty space beside him in bed, a constant reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he was about to lose. In the darkness, the old house settled and creaked. Familiar sounds that should have been comforting but tonight felt like a countdown. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its lonely howl echoing across the parched landscape. Bobby closed his eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. He'd prayed for Patricia's healing, and she'd died anyway. He'd prayed for rain, and the sky stayed stubbornly clear. He'd prayed for a miracle to save the ranch, and all he'd gotten was a letter giving him 60 days to produce money he didn't have. Hope, Bobby thought as sleep finally began to pull him under, was a dangerous thing. It made you believe in possibilities that didn't exist. It made you think that hard work and good intentions were enough. And when hope finally died, it left behind something worse than despair. It left behind the hollow certainty that you were on your own. And sometimes, being on your own just wasn't enough. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another day of trying to hold together something that was already breaking apart. But tonight, Robert Caldwell let himself grieve for the ranch he was losing, for the wife who'd left him too soon, and for the grandfather who'd trusted him with a legacy he was about to fail. The Texas stars shone overhead, indifferent and eternal, while below them, a man struggled with the very human weight of love and loss and the impossible math of survival. The alarm clock read 4:47 a.m. when Bobby's eyes opened. He hadn't needed the alarm in years. His body was trained to wake before dawn. A rancher's rhythm carved deep into his bones. Outside, the world was still dark, though a faint gray line on the eastern horizon promised another day. Bobby dressed in the darkness. Worn jeans, a thermal undershirt, his work boots with the left heel wearing unevenly. The house was cold. He'd been keeping the heat low to save on the electric bill. Every dollar counted now, even though in the grand scheme of $180,000, $20 a month on heating seemed laughably insignificant. Chester met him at the kitchen door, tail wagging hopefully. Bobby filled the dog's bowl with kibble, then put on a pot of coffee. The cheap stuff from the grocery store, not the good Colombian blend Patricia used to buy. Another small economy, another tiny surrender. While the coffee brewed, Bobby stepped onto the porch. The November air was crisp, carrying a bite that promised winter was coming. The weather forecast called for another dry week, then another. The drought that had begun as an inconvenience 18 months ago had evolved into a catastrophe. Not just for the Caldwell Ranch, but for farmers and ranchers across central Texas. Bobby knew he wasn't alone in his struggle, which somehow made it worse rather than better. There was no comfort in shared suffering when you were all drowning together. He drank his coffee black, watching the sun creep over the horizon and paint the landscape in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful, even in its devastation. The land looked fragile in this light, ancient and tired, like it too was ready to give up. Jennifer's truck was parked beside the barn. She'd stayed in her old bedroom last night instead of making the 40-minute drive back to her apartment in Kerrville. Bobby knew she was worried about him, though she tried to hide it. She'd inherited Patricia's tendency to care for others before herself, a trait that made Bobby simultaneously proud and concerned. By 5:30, Bobby was in the barn, beginning the morning routine. Feed the horses, Ranger and Dakota, Patricia's mare that Jennifer sometimes rode. Check the water troughs. Walk the fence line in the near pastures, looking for breaks or weak spots. The work was meditative, familiar, the kind of labor that let a man's mind wander while his hands stayed busy. He was mucking out Ranger's stall when Jennifer appeared, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing one of her mother's old barn coats. "Morning," she said, picking up a pitchfork without being asked. "Morning. You sleep okay?" "Yeah. You?" Bobby shrugged, which was answer enough. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic scrape of pitchforks against concrete, the soft sounds of horses eating their morning grain. "I've been thinking," Jennifer said eventually. "What if we leased some of the land? Keep the core 40 acres with the house and barn, lease the rest to another rancher. That would bring in some income, might convince the bank to restructure." Bobby had thought of that. Talked to Ben Patterson over in Pipe Creek last month. He's in the same boat we are, cut his herd by half, barely holding on. Nobody's looking to take on more land right now. Not with feed prices up and cattle prices down. And even if we found someone, Harold made it clear the bank wants the full amount. They're done restructuring. Jennifer stabbed her pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. Harold Peterson's a bastard. He's doing his job. His job is ruining people's lives. Bobby couldn't argue with that, even if he understood the economics. First National Bank of Bandera was a small regional bank, not some faceless corporate entity. Harold Peterson had been 2 years ahead of Bobby in high school. They'd played football together, dated girls from the same small-town circles. Harold had 3 kids and a mortgage of his own. He didn't enjoy foreclosing on the Caldwell Ranch. But business was business, and the bank had investors to answer to. What about selling off parcels? Jennifer pressed. We could sell the north section, the 80 acres along Ranch Road 470. That's got highway frontage, might be worth something to developers. Thought about that too. Called a real estate agent in Bandera, woman named Linda Howell. She said with the market the way it is, we might get 30, maybe 40,000 for that section. Not enough to stop the foreclosure. And then we'd have lost part of the ranch anyway. Jennifer leaned on her pitchfork, frustration evident in every line of her body. So what do we do? Just give up? We keep working, Bobby said quietly. We do right by the animals we've got, maintain the property, and when December 15th comes, we hold our heads high. That's all we can do. That's not enough. It's gonna have to be. The conversation died there, killed by the weight of impossible circumstances. They finished the barn work and headed to the house for breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, food from their own chickens and bread Bobby had bought on sale. Simple, filling, the kind of meal ranchers had been eating for generations. Over coffee, Jennifer scrolled through her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you looking at?" Bobby asked, trying to find anything that might help. Agricultural grants, relief programs, emergency loans. She looked up, her eyes tired. "Did you know there's a program through the USDA for drought-affected ranchers? It can provide up to $50,000 in assistance. Applied for it in August. Still waiting to hear back. Even if it comes through, it's not enough." "What about the Veterans Administration? You served 4 years in the Army. There might be benefits you're not using." Bobby had served from 1992 to 1996, stationed at Fort Hood, deployed to Kuwait for 6 months during his second year. It seemed like another lifetime, a young man's adventure before he'd come home to take over the ranch from his aging father. VA mortgage assistance is for buying a home, not saving one. "Trust me, Jenny. I've looked into everything. There's no magic solution here." Jennifer set down her phone, her jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Bobby so much of Patricia. "Then we make our own solution. We work harder, we cut costs to the bone, We're already cutting to the bone," Bobby interrupted gently. "No hired help. Minimal feed expenses. I'm running equipment that should have been replaced 5 years ago. The house needs a new roof. The barn needs structural work. We're not cutting costs anymore. We're just delaying collapse." "So, that's it? You're just accepting this?" Bobby met his daughter's eyes, saw the desperation there, the refusal to surrender. He wished he could give her the fight she wanted to see, the defiant stand against impossible odds. But he was tired, soul-deep tired, and fighting for the sake of fighting seemed like cruelty to both of them. "I'm accepting reality," he said. "That's different from giving up. I've done everything I know how to do, Jenny. I've called in every favor, pursued every option, worked every angle. Sometimes a man runs out of moves. That doesn't make him a quitter. It makes him human." Jennifer's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Grandpa William wouldn't have accepted this. The words stung, even though Bobby knew they came from pain rather than malice. Your grandpa lived in different times. Banks worked differently. Weather patterns were different. The entire economy was different. And you know what? Even William faced things he couldn't control. He lost 40 head of cattle to disease in 1962. The drought of '56 nearly broke him. He survived because he had time to recover, because the next year brought rain and good prices and luck. We don't have time, sweetheart. We've got 60 days minus one. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock, an old sunburst design from the 1970s that Patricia had loved despite its tackiness. Time passing, relentless and indifferent. "I should check the south pasture wells," Bobby said, rising from the table. "Want to come?" Jennifer shook her head. "I've got a call scheduled with Dr. Reynolds at the Kerrville Clinic. He's supposed to tell me if there's a position opening up or if I'm still doing relief work." Bobby nodded and headed out, Chester trotting at his heels. The morning had warmed slightly, though the sun felt thin and watery. He climbed into his truck, a 2008 Chevy Silverado with 187,000 miles on it, and headed down the rutted dirt road toward the southern section of the property. The wells were functioning, but the water levels were lower than he'd like. Bobby checked the pump mechanisms, made notes about which ones might need service soon, and tried not to think about the fact that well maintenance would soon be someone else's problem. He was checking the fence line along the southern border when he heard another vehicle approaching. A newer Ford F-250 pulled up, and Danny Bishop climbed out. Danny was in his mid-40s, ran a successful ranch about 10 miles south. He and Bobby had known each other for years, served on the Bandera County Cattlemen's Association together. "Bobby," Danny said, extending a hand. "Danny, what brings you out here?" Danny looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Heard about your situation. Harold Peterson's wife is friends with my wife, and word gets around. I wanted to come talk to you man to man." Bobby waited, already knowing he wouldn't like whatever came next. "I'm interested in buying some of your cattle," Danny said. "I know you're down to about 20 head, but if you're looking to liquidate assets, I'd give you fair market value. Might help you raise some capital before the deadline." Fair market value. In this drought, with cattle thin and prices depressed, that meant maybe $50,000 if Bobby sold every single animal. It wouldn't save the ranch, and it would leave him with nothing to work with, even if a miracle did occur. "Appreciate the offer," Bobby said carefully, "but I think I'm going to hold on to them for now." Danny nodded, seeming relieved that the conversation was ending quickly. "I understand, but if you change your mind, call me. The offer stands." He hesitated, then added, "I'm real sorry about all this, Bobby. You're good people. You and Patricia both. This isn't right." "It's business," Bobby said, echoing his own words to Jennifer. "Can't take it personal." After Danny left, Bobby sat in his truck for a long while, staring out at the land his grandfather had claimed, his father had nurtured, and he was going to lose. The unfairness of it clawed at him. He'd done everything right, worked hard, treated people fairly, paid his bills, loved his wife, raised his daughter, and yet here he was, watching everything crumble because the rain wouldn't fall and the bank wouldn't wait and cancer wouldn't lose. His phone buzzed, a text from Jennifer. "Dr. Reynolds offering full-time position. Starts January. Good salary plus benefits. One good thing happening at least." Bobby smiled despite everything. Jennifer's success mattered more than his failures. She would be okay. She would build a good life, find her own path. That had to be enough. He drove back to the main house. spent the afternoon repairing a section of fence that didn't really need repairing, just for something to do with his hands. Around 4 o'clock, Jennifer found him and insisted he come inside for an early dinner. She'd made pot roast, his favorite, using a recipe Patricia had perfected over 30 years of marriage. They ate together at the kitchen table, talking about Jennifer's new job, about her plans to specialize in large animal medicine, about everything except the elephant in the room with its 60-day countdown. After dinner, Bobby retreated to the living room while Jennifer cleaned up. He sat in his recliner, the same one his father had died in back in 2004, and stared at the wall of photographs. 3 generations of Caldwells, all their hopes and struggles and triumphs, frozen in fading images. His eye caught on one particular photo. His grandfather William, standing in front of the newly built barn in 1948, chest puffed with pride. His whole life ahead of him. William had believed in the American dream, believed that a man who worked hard enough could build something lasting, something meaningful. He'd passed that belief to his son James, who'd passed it to Bobby. But what happened when hard work wasn't enough? What happened when you did everything right and still lost? What did that say about the dream? About the promise that effort equaled reward? Bobby didn't have answers. He just had 59 days left and a debt he couldn't pay, and land that would soon belong to strangers. Jennifer appeared in the doorway. "I'm heading back to Kerrville. Early day tomorrow." Bobby stood, hugged his daughter tight. "Proud of you, Jenny. Your mama would be too." "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart." After she left, the house felt cavernously empty. Bobby returned to his chair, Chester curled at his feet, and let the evening darkness gather around him like a blanket. Outside, the first stars appeared, the same stars that had shone on his grandfather, his father, and now him, constant and indifferent, beautiful and cold. Tomorrow he would wake before dawn and do the work again, because that's what you did. You kept going until you couldn't anymore. You honored the land and the animals and the legacy, right up until the moment it was taken from you. But tonight, Bobby Caldwell allowed himself to feel the full measure of his exhaustion, his grief, and his fading hope. 59 days. The clock was ticking, and he was fresh out of miracles. 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine and quiet desperation. Bobby rose before dawn each day, tended the animals, maintained the property, and watched the calendar pages turn with the inevitability of a death sentence. Thanksgiving came and went. Jennifer joined him for a modest meal, neither of them wanting to acknowledge that it might be their last Thanksgiving in the house where she'd grown up. By early December, Bobby had 45 days left. He'd received a letter from the USDA about his drought assistance application, approved, but for only $32,000, to be distributed over the next fiscal year. Too little, too late. He'd filed it away with the other useless documents that represented bureaucratic sympathy without actual help. It was a Tuesday morning, December 3rd, when Bobby drove into town for supplies. Bandera was a small community of about 850 people, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business. The feed store, the bank, the diner, the post office. Each visit came with sympathetic looks and carefully worded inquiries about how things were going. Bobby had learned to smile, nod, and change the subject quickly. He was loading 50-pound bags of feed into his truck bed behind Martinez Feed and Supply when his phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. "This is Bobby Caldwell." "Mr. Caldwell, this is Diane Foster from the Bandera County Community Foundation. We're organizing a fundraiser event this Saturday, December 7th, at the Mansfield Park Rodeo Grounds. It's a benefit concert for the local food bank and Veterans Services. We're also having a craft fair and silent auction beforehand. I know this is short notice, but we're looking for volunteers to help with setup. And we thought of you, given your military service and your family's long history in Bandera County. Bobby's first instinct was to decline. The last thing he wanted was to be around cheerful community gatherings while his own world was falling apart. But volunteering had been important to Patricia. She'd served on half a dozen community boards, always believing that a community took care of its own. "What kind of help do you need?" he heard himself asking. "Just set up on Saturday morning. Tables, chairs, helping vendors get their booths organized. A few hours of your time. We'd be so grateful." Bobby thought about his empty schedule, about the work he was doing just to keep busy. "I can do that." "What time?" 7 a.m. "We're serving coffee and breakfast tacos for the volunteers." "I'll be there." "Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Caldwell. And please, if you have any items you'd like to donate to the silent auction, we'd love to have them. People donate everything from artwork to gift certificates to handmade goods." After hanging up, Bobby stood in the parking lot of the feed store, wondering why he'd agreed. But it was done, and a Caldwell kept his word. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Bobby dressed in clean jeans and his better flannel shirt, the blue one Patricia had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. He fed the animals, left fresh water for Chester, and drove into town. Mansfield Park was already bustling with activity when he arrived. Diane Foster turned out to be an energetic woman in her 60s, wearing a bright red jacket and wielding a clipboard like a general commanding troops. "Mr. Caldwell, so glad you could make it. We've got tables that need setting up in the pavilion area, and the craft fair vendors start arriving at 8. Can you help coordinate the booth assignments?" Bobby spent the next 3 hours working steadily, hauling tables, directing vendors, helping an elderly woman named Grace Patterson unload hand-quilted blankets for her booth. The work felt good, purposeful, in a way his ranch tasks had stopped feeling. Around him, the community came together in the effortless choreography of people who'd done this kind of thing dozens of times before. The craft fair opened at 10, drawing a decent crowd despite the chilly weather. Bobby was helping adjust a sagging canopy at one of the booths when he heard someone call his name. "Bobby Caldwell? That really you?" He turned to find Tom Richardson, a man he'd gone to school with 40 years ago, now running a barbecue booth for his restaurant in town. "Tom, good to see you. Heard about your trouble with the ranch. Real sorry, man. That's a damn shame." Before Bobby could respond, Tom was pulled away by a customer, leaving Bobby with the familiar sting of public sympathy. Everyone knew. Everyone felt sorry for him, and no one could do anything to help. By noon, the craft fair was in full swing, and the silent auction items were displayed on tables near the main pavilion. Bobby wandered through, looking at the donated goods. A weekend stay at a bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg. A custom saddle made by a local leather worker. Artwork, jewelry, a guitar signed by some local musicians. The guitar caught his eye. It was a beautiful instrument. A Martin acoustic with intricate inlay work. The sight of it reminded Bobby of his own guitar, the one sitting in his bedroom closet at home. He'd bought it 20 years ago, back when he and Patricia had talked about him learning to play. He'd taken a few lessons, learned a handful of chords, but ranch work always took priority. The guitar had become a decoration, a symbol of intentions that never quite materialized. "It's a beauty, isn't it?" Bobby turned to find an older man standing beside him, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, a cowboy hat shading his face. There was something familiar about him, though Bobby couldn't quite place it. "It is," Bobby agreed. "My wife always wanted me to learn to play properly. Ran out of time for a lot of things." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Time's the one thing we never seem to have enough of." "You play at all?" Not well. Got a guitar at home that mostly collects dust. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both studying the instrument. You from around here? The man asked. Born and raised. Got a ranch about 15 miles out. Bobby caught himself. Had a ranch? Losing it next month. He didn't know why he'd said it. This unvarnished truth to a complete stranger. Maybe because the stranger didn't have the sympathetic head tilt that everyone else in town had perfected. Maybe because there was something about the man's quiet presence that invited honesty. I'm sorry to hear that, the man said simply. Ranching's hard enough without the world working against you. That's the truth. What'll you do after? Bobby hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Don't know. Haven't gotten there yet in my head. Still got 42 days before the bank takes it. Feels wrong to make plans for after when I'm still living in the before. The man removed his hat, and Bobby finally recognized him. George Strait, the king of country music, standing right there in Mansfield Park like any other Bandera County resident. Bobby blinked, momentarily speechless. George Strait lived in the area, everyone knew that, but seeing him in person at a small-town fundraiser was surreal. I'm sorry, I didn't... You're... Bobby stumbled over his words. George smiled warmly. Just a guy looking at guitars and talking to a fellow Texan. You said you've got a guitar at home? Bobby nodded, still processing. Yeah, a Taylor. Had it appraised once for insurance purposes, back when money was less tight. Worth about $8,000, apparently. Been thinking about selling it, try to raise whatever I can before the deadline. 8,000's nothing to sneeze at, George said. But it won't save your ranch? No, sir. Oh, 180,000. 8,000's a drop in the bucket. But it's something. And something's better than nothing, I suppose. George was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. How long's your family had the ranch? Since 1947. My grandfather William started it after the war. Passed it to my father, who passed it to me. Was supposed to pass it to my daughter, but... Bobby shrugged helplessly. Some legacies don't make it. You serve? George asked, noticing the Army veteran cap Bobby wore. 4 years. Nothing like my grandfather, though. He was at D-Day. Came home and built something real, something lasting. Or what should have been lasting. They talked for another 20 minutes, and Bobby found himself telling George things he hadn't told anyone. About Patricia's death, about the crushing weight of the medical debt combined with the drought, about watching his daughter try so hard to be strong when she should be celebrating her new career, about the shame of failing to protect a legacy 3 generations in the making. George listened without interruption, his face reflecting genuine empathy. When Bobby finally ran out of words, George was quiet for a long moment. You know, George said eventually, I've been blessed beyond measure in my life, more than I probably deserve. And I've always believed that when you're blessed, you've got a responsibility to be a blessing to others. Would you mind if I came out to see your ranch sometime this week? I'd like to understand what you're up against. No promises, but maybe there's something that can be done. Bobby wanted to say no, wanted to protect his pride, wanted to avoid the crushing disappointment if nothing came of it. But he was also a drowning man. And when someone throws you a rope, you grab it, even if you're not sure it's attached to anything. I'd be honored to show you around, Bobby said quietly. Though I warn you, it's not much to look at these days. They exchanged phone numbers, and George promised to call in the next few days to arrange a visit. Then Diane Foster was calling for George, something about the sound check for the concert later that afternoon, and the moment broke. Bobby wandered back through the craft fair in a daze. Had that really just happened? Had George Strait really expressed interest in helping? Or had it just been a famous man being polite to a struggling stranger? The kind of empty promise people made when they wanted to seem compassionate, but had no intention of following through. Bobby tried not to let hope take root. Hope was dangerous. Hope made the disappointment hurt worse. He helped with the cleanup after the craft fair ended, then stayed for the beginning of the concert. George Strait took the stage to enormous applause, launching into Amarillo by Morning with the effortless skill of a man who'd been doing this for 4 decades. The crowd sang along, families bundled in jackets, kids on parents' shoulders, the whole community coming together. Bobby watched for a while, then slipped away before the concert ended. The 2-hour drive home gave him time to think, to process the surreal encounter. Chester greeted him at the door, tail wagging frantically. Bobby fed the dog, then went to his bedroom and opened the closet. His Taylor guitar sat in its case, untouched for months. He pulled it out, ran his fingers over the smooth wood, and thought about Patricia. She'd bought him a book once, Country Guitar for Beginners, with a note inside that read, "For all the songs you have inside you waiting to come out. Love, always, Patty." He'd never learned those songs. He'd been too busy, too focused on the immediate demands of the ranch. There was always tomorrow for hobbies, for dreams, for the life you'd live after the work was done. Except sometimes tomorrow never came. Sometimes the work never ended. And sometimes the things you thought you'd have forever disappeared, while you weren't paying attention. Bobby set the guitar carefully back in its case and closed the closet door. If selling it could buy a few more weeks, help pay off some of the debt after the foreclosure, then it needed to be sold. Sentiment was another luxury he couldn't afford. But as he lay in bed that night, Chester snoring softly on the rug beside him, Bobby allowed himself the smallest, most dangerous indulgence. He wondered what George Strait had meant. Was there really something that could be done? Or was Bobby setting himself up for another crushing disappointment in a year that had already delivered more than any man should have to bear? 42 days. The clock kept ticking. But maybe, just maybe, something had changed. Bobby fell asleep with that fragile maybe cradled carefully in his chest, afraid to examine it too closely, for fear it might dissolve like morning mist under the harsh Texas sun. George Strait called on Monday morning. Bobby was in the barn, measuring out feed, when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number. Too many calls lately had been creditors or sympathetic acquaintances he didn't have the energy to talk to. But something made him swipe to accept. "Mr. Caldwell, it's George Strait. We talked at the fundraiser on Saturday. I was hoping I could come see your ranch sometime this week, if the offer still stands." Bobby's heart kicked against his ribs. "Yes, sir, absolutely. When were you thinking? Would tomorrow work? Late morning, maybe around 11? That would be fine, real fine." After they hung up, Bobby stood in the barn holding his phone, wondering if this was really happening. Chester looked up at him expectantly, and Bobby laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "Might be losing my mind, Chester, but George Strait's coming to the ranch tomorrow." He spent the rest of the day doing things that made no logical sense. Cleaning the barn more thoroughly than necessary, straightening up the house, even mowing the small patch of lawn around the homestead despite the dormant winter grass. He told himself he wasn't getting his hopes up, that this was probably just a courtesy visit, a famous man being kind. But his hands kept moving, kept preparing, kept hoping despite his brain's warnings. That evening, he called Jennifer. "George Strait's coming to the ranch tomorrow," he said without preamble. "What? Dad? What are you talking about?" Bobby explained the encounter at the fundraiser, the phone call that morning. Jennifer was silent for a long moment. "Do you think he might actually help?" she asked finally, her voice careful, trying not to sound too hopeful. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm trying not to think about it too hard. He seemed genuine, but who knows what help means? Maybe he knows someone at the bank. Maybe he's got advice. Maybe nothing. I'm just taking it one step at a time. I want to be there. You've got work. I'm taking a personal day. This is important. I'll be there by 10. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, the temperature hovering just above freezing. Bobby was up at his usual time, running through the morning chores with particular attention to detail. Jennifer arrived at 9:30, bringing donuts and good coffee. The real stuff, not the cheap grocery store brand. "Figured if George Strait's coming, we should at least have decent coffee to offer," she said. They waited together on the porch, Bobby in his clean flannel shirt and newer jeans, Jennifer pacing nervously. A few minutes past 11, a dark blue Ford F-150 turned down the long driveway, pulling up in front of the house. George Strait climbed out, dressed casually in jeans, boots, and a canvas jacket. He shook Bobby's hand warmly, then Jennifer's. "Appreciate you having me out here," George said. "This is quite a spread." "Was quite a spread," Bobby corrected gently. 340 acres. Been in the family since my grandfather started it in '47. They walked the property, Bobby pointing out the various sections, the main pastures, the barn his father had rebuilt in the 1980s, the creek bed that used to run full year-round, but had been dry for over a year. George asked thoughtful questions about the cattle operation, the drought's impact, the specific financial pressures. Bobby found himself being honest in a way he hadn't been with anyone, except Jennifer. Maybe it was because George was essentially a stranger, someone outside the community's web of relationships and judgment. Maybe it was because at this point, pride seemed like an expensive luxury. Or maybe it was because George listened with the kind of genuine attention that made you want to tell the truth. They ended up in the barn, where Ranger and Dakota whickered hopefully, looking for treats. George patted Ranger's neck appreciatively. "Beautiful horse." "Quarter horse?" "Yes, sir. He was my wife, Patricia's. She passed about 14 months ago. Cancer. The medical bills..." Bobby's voice caught. "That's what started the real trouble. We'd mortgaged the ranch to pay for treatments. Experimental stuff insurance wouldn't cover. And then she died anyway. And the drought hit. And it all just came apart." George was quiet, his hand still on Ranger's neck. "I'm real sorry about your wife. Can't imagine that kind of loss on top of everything else." Jennifer had been hanging back, but now she stepped forward. "My dad's the best man I know. He's worked this land his whole life. Never asked anyone for anything. Always helped neighbors when they needed it. It's not fair that he's losing it. It's just not fair." Her voice broke on the last word, and Bobby put his arm around her shoulders. George nodded slowly. "You're right. It's not fair. And I've been thinking about what might be done. I can't just write a check for $180,000. That's not how I work. And honestly, it wouldn't sit right. But what if we mobilized this community? What if we showed the world what happens when good people face hard times? Would you be willing to let me organize something?" Bobby wasn't sure what he meant. "Organize what?" "A benefit concert. Here, on your ranch. We'd set up a stage, bring in some friends of mine from the music business, sell tickets, take donations. All proceeds go to saving the Caldwell Ranch. I can't guarantee we'd raise the full amount, but I bet we could make a serious dent. What do you say?" Bobby's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of being a charity case, of having thousands of strangers descend on his failing ranch, felt humiliating. But then he looked at Jennifer's face, saw the desperate hope there, and he thought about his grandfather William. Would William have let pride stop him from saving the ranch? Or would he have done whatever it took? I I don't know what to say, Bobby managed. Say yes, Jennifer whispered. Dad, please, say yes. Yes, Bobby said, the word coming out rough. Yes, and thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. George smiled. Let's see if we can pull this off first. I'll need to make some calls, but I'm thinking we could do this Saturday, December 14th. That gives us 12 days to organize. It'll be tight, but I've got a team that's used to moving fast. You just focus on getting ready to have some folks on your property. We'll handle the rest. The next week moved with the speed and chaos of a hurricane. George's team descended on Bandera. Event coordinators, sound engineers, publicists. Word spread through the community like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to help. Tom Richardson and his restaurant offered to cater food for volunteers. The local hardware store donated lumber for stage construction. Diane Foster and the Community Foundation stepped up to handle ticketing and logistics. High school students volunteered to help with parking and crowd control. Jennifer took charge of coordinating the local volunteers, her organizational skills from vet school serving her well. She created spreadsheets, managed communication chains, and worked 18-hour days to make sure every detail was covered. Bobby mostly tried to stay out of the way, helping where he could, but mostly watching in amazement as his quiet, failing ranch transformed into something alive, with purpose and hope. Media coverage began almost immediately. Local news stations picked up the story. Country music legend organizes benefit to save historic Texas ranch. Then regional outlets. By midweek, it had gone national. CNN ran a segment. People magazine called for an interview. Social media exploded with the hashtag #SaveCaldwellRanch. Donations started pouring in through the website George's team had set up. $20 from a teacher in Ohio, $50 from a veteran in California who'd read about Bobby's military service, $100 from a ranching family in Montana facing their own drought. Small amounts, but they added up. By Thursday, the online donations had reached $43,000. Tickets for the concert sold out in 6 hours. George's team had priced them reasonably. $50 for general admission, $200 for VIP seating closer to the stage. 5,000 tickets total. That was another $250,000 in potential revenue, though production costs would eat into that. Bobby watched it all with a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and shame. He was grateful for the help, couldn't believe it was happening, and deeply ashamed that it had come to this, that he needed strangers' charity to save what he should have been able to protect himself. Jennifer found him on Thursday evening, sitting alone on the porch while a crew erected staging equipment in the south pasture. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know what I am," Bobby admitted. It's overwhelming. It's people caring about you, about us, about what this ranch represents. It's people feeling sorry for me." Jennifer sat beside him, took his hand. It's people recognizing that sometimes good folks face impossible circumstances. And when they do, we help. That's what communities do. That's what you've always done for others. Remember when the Martinez family's house burned down? You organized a fundraiser, collected materials, helped rebuild. You didn't think they should be ashamed. You thought they deserved help. Bobby remembered. Carlos Rivera and his family had lost everything in an electrical fire. The community had rallied, and within 3 months, they'd had a new home. Bobby had spent weekends doing construction work, had donated money he probably couldn't afford, even then. "That was different," he said weakly. "How?" He couldn't answer, because she was right. It wasn't different. Pride was making him see charity when he should be seeing community. Patricia would have understood that. She'd always been better at accepting help. at understanding that sometimes strength meant letting others carry part of the weight. "Your mama would have loved this," Bobby said quietly. "All these people coming together. She would have. And she'd tell you to stop feeling guilty and start feeling grateful." Friday brought more chaos. George arrived with several other musicians. Bobby recognized some of them from album covers and award shows, though he'd never been much for following celebrity culture. They were setting up for sound check, fine-tuning arrangements, treating this benefit concert with the same professionalism they'd bring to a stadium tour. The weather forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the low 60s, no wind. The universe, it seemed, was cooperating. By Friday evening, the ranch looked transformed. A professional stage dominated the south pasture, complete with lighting rigs and massive speaker arrays. Food vendor tents lined the access road. Portable restrooms had been delivered and positioned discreetly behind the barn. Parking attendants had laid out a system to handle 5,000 vehicles. Security personnel walked the perimeter. The quiet, failing ranch, where Bobby had been slowly losing hope, had become something else entirely. A beacon of possibility. A testament to what happened when people decided someone was worth saving. Bobby stood at the edge of the activity, Chester at his side, and felt tears prick his eyes. Win or lose, succeed or fail, he would remember this. He would remember that, when he'd needed it most, people had shown up. George found him there, handed him a bottle of water. "How you holding up?" George asked. "I don't have words for what this means," Bobby said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we raise, thank you. Thank you for seeing something here worth saving. Bobby, this ranch, your family's legacy, your story, it matters. Not just to you and Jennifer, but to everyone who believes that hard work and dedication should mean something. That's what we're fighting for tomorrow. Not just land and buildings, but the idea that decent people deserve a fighting chance." Saturday, December 14th, dawned clear and beautiful. Bobby was up at 3 a.m., though there was little left for him to do. The professional crews had everything handled. By mid-morning, people began arriving. Families with kids, elderly couples, groups of veterans, other ranchers and farmers who understood exactly what Bobby was facing. Jennifer stayed close to her father as the crowd grew. By noon, the pasture was filled with thousands of people, all of them here for one reason: to help save the Caldwell Ranch. The concert began at 1 p.m. Local acts opened: a high school country band that was surprisingly good, a folk singer from Kerrville, a conjunto group that got the crowd dancing. Between performances, speakers told Bobby's story. A fellow veteran talked about service and sacrifice. A representative from the Texas Cattlemen's Association discussed the drought's impact on ranching families across the state. Diane Foster read testimonials from community members about the Caldwell family's contributions over 3 generations. Bobby sat in a reserved section near the stage, feeling exposed and humbled by turns. Cameras captured his reactions, and he tried to maintain composure even as emotion kept threatening to overwhelm him. Then George Strait took the stage, and the crowd erupted. He played for 90 minutes, all the hits, deep cuts for the true fans, and a new song he said he'd written that week, inspired by Bobby's story. It was called "The Legacy Stands," and by the time George reached the chorus, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The bank can take the deed, but they can't take the years, can't take the blood and sweat, can't take the dreams and tears. 3 generations strong on Texas land. And when good people fight, the legacy stands. The concert ended at 5 p.m. As the last notes faded and the crowd began to disperse, George's event coordinator, a efficient woman named Rebecca Chen, approached Bobby with a tablet. "Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to give you preliminary numbers before they're announced officially. Ticket sales brought in $212,000 after production costs. Online donations through the website have reached $98,000. Silent auction items, including your guitar, which Mr. Strait himself purchased and is donating back to you, added another $47,000. Corporate sponsors contributed $65,000. We're still counting cash donations from the event, but conservatively, we're looking at a total of $435,000. Bobby stared at her, unable to process the number. That can't be right. It's right. You've raised enough to pay off your debt, cover your back property taxes, and have operating capital left over to restart your cattle operation. Jennifer grabbed her father's arm, her face bright with tears and joy. Dad, we did it. The ranch is saved. Bobby couldn't speak. He pulled Jennifer into a hug, his shoulders shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for over a year. Around them, volunteers and organizers celebrated, but Bobby barely heard it. All he could think was that the impossible had happened. Hope, that dangerous luxury he'd refused himself, had been vindicated. George appeared, clapping Bobby on the shoulder. Told you this community would show up. I don't know how I'll ever repay this, Bobby managed. You don't repay it. You pay it forward. You keep this ranch running, you pass it to Jennifer when the time comes, and when you see someone else facing impossible odds, you show up for them the way people showed up for you today. That's how this works. Monday morning, December 16th, Bobby walked into First National Bank of Bandera carrying a cashier's check for $182,417, enough to cover the mortgage debt, the back property taxes, and the various fees that had accumulated. Harold Peterson looked up from his desk as Bobby entered, and for a moment, surprise crossed his features. "Bobby, I wasn't expecting to see you until closer to the deadline." "Got a payment to make," Bobby said, sliding the check across the desk. Harold picked it up, studied it, then looked at Bobby with an expression mixing relief and genuine happiness. "I saw what happened this weekend. The concert. It's been all over the news. Bobby, I'm really glad. You have no idea how glad. You'll forgive the debt? Clear the foreclosure?" "Absolutely. I'll process this immediately and have the satisfaction paperwork ready for you by end of business today." Harold stood, extended his hand. "Welcome back from the edge, Bobby. This is the ending I was hoping for." Bobby shook his hand, feeling the weight of the past year finally beginning to lift. "Appreciate that, Harold. I know you were just doing your job. Doesn't mean I had to like it. This is a good day, Bobby. A real good day." Bobby left the bank and drove to the ranch, where he found Jennifer already there, meeting with a livestock broker about rebuilding their herd. The money from the benefit had left them with approximately $240,000 after clearing all debts. It was enough to buy cattle, repair equipment, hire back Carlos and Miguel Rivera, and operate comfortably for at least 2 years while they rebuilt. Over the next few weeks, the Caldwell Ranch transformed again. Not into a concert venue this time, but back into a working cattle operation. Bobby purchased 40 head of quality breeding stock. He had the barn roof repaired, the equipment serviced, the wells maintained properly. Carlos and Miguel returned, grateful for their jobs and eager to help restore the ranch to its former productivity. Jennifer negotiated a reduced schedule at the veterinary clinic in Kerrville, allowing her to spend 3 days a week working on the ranch. She began developing a plan to diversify their income. Agritourism, educational programs for school groups about ranching life, maybe a farm-to-table beef program selling directly to consumers. Grandpa William adapted to his times, she explained to Bobby over dinner one evening in mid-January. He started with nothing and built something sustainable. Dad started with cattle ranching and added hay production. We need to adapt too. Find ways to make this ranch resilient against future droughts. Market changes, whatever comes. Bobby listened, proud of his daughter's vision. This was what legacy meant. Not keeping everything exactly as it was, but preserving the core values while adapting to new realities. In late January, George Strait visited again, this time bringing a film crew. They were making a documentary about the benefit concert and what had happened after, part of a series about communities supporting their own. "How's it feel?" George asked Bobby as they walked the pastures, now dotted with healthy cattle. "Feels like waking up from a nightmare," Bobby admitted. "Some mornings I still can't quite believe it happened, that all those people cared enough to show up. People care about stories that matter. And yours matters, Bobby. A veteran, a widower, a man who'd done everything right and still faced losing it all. That resonated. But more than that, what resonated was the 3 generations of legacy. The idea that some things are worth saving just because they represent who we are as people, as communities, as a country." They stopped at the fence line overlooking the southern pasture, the same spot where Bobby had stood 2 months earlier, drowning in hopelessness. "I've been thinking about my grandfather a lot lately," Bobby said. William Caldwell. He came back from World War II with nothing but some mustering out pay and a dream. Built this place from scratch. He used to tell me that land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. We're just caretakers for the next generation. I almost failed that trust. "But you didn't," George said firmly. "You fought for it right up until you couldn't fight alone anymore. And then you let others fight with you. That's not failure, Bobby. That's wisdom." The documentary aired in March on a major streaming platform. It told Bobby's story, showed footage from the benefit concert, and followed up on how the ranch was recovering. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages from people across the country sharing their own stories of struggle and community support, of times when hope seemed lost until others stepped in. Bobby and Jennifer were interviewed on morning shows, featured in ranching magazines, and invited to speak at agricultural conferences about ranch sustainability and community resilience. Bobby was uncomfortable with the attention at first, but Jennifer convinced him it was important. "People need to hear that asking for help isn't weakness," she told him. "They need to know that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you can't do it alone." Spring brought rain, beautiful, steady, soaking rain that turned the parched pastures green again. The creek bed filled for the first time in nearly 2 years. The cattle fattened on fresh grass. Life, it seemed, was returning to normal, though normal now meant something different than it had before. Bobby hired a part-time ranch manager, a young man named Tyler Whitmore, fresh out of agricultural college, eager to learn and full of innovative ideas about rotational grazing and water conservation. With Tyler handling some of the day-to-day operations, Bobby found himself with time for things he'd never prioritized before. He started taking guitar lessons again, this time from an instructor in Bandera. George had indeed purchased Bobby's Taylor guitar at the benefit auction and returned it to him, along with a note that read, "Some things are worth more than money. Learn those songs your wife wanted to hear." So Bobby learned. Slowly, painfully at first, his fingers clumsy on the frets. But he persisted, and gradually the chords came easier, the transitions smoother. He learned Amarillo by Morning in honor of George. He learned I Cross My Heart, which had been the first dance song at his and Patricia's wedding. He learned new songs and old ones, filling the ranch house with music for the first time since Patricia's piano had fallen silent. One evening in late April, Jennifer brought a guest to dinner, a veterinarian named David Pearson who worked at the Kerrville Clinic. Bobby recognized the nervous energy. The careful attention David paid to Jennifer's words, the way his daughter's eyes lit up when David told a story. Young love, or the beginning of it. Bobby grilled steaks from their own cattle, the first harvest from the rebuilt herd, and they ate on the porch as the sun set in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Chester begged shamelessly for scraps. David asked thoughtful questions about the ranch, about the benefit concert, about Bobby's plans for the future. After dinner, Jennifer and David walked down to the creek, and Bobby was left alone with his thoughts and his guitar. He played quietly, watching the stars emerge, thinking about Patricia and how much she would have loved this. The ranch saved, their daughter happy, music filling the evening air. He thought about his grandfather William, about the 79 years of Caldwell history on this land, about the future that had almost been stolen but had been saved by the extraordinary kindness of strangers who became friends. In late May, Bobby received a letter from the Texas Department of Agriculture. They'd selected the Caldwell Ranch as one of 10 properties across the state to receive a multi-year grant for sustainable ranching practices and drought resilience research. The letter cited the ranch's historical significance, demonstrated commitment to land stewardship, and recent community-supported revival as reasons for the selection. The grant came with $60,000 annually for 5 years, plus technical support from agricultural scientists at Texas A&M. It was more than money. It was validation, recognition that the Caldwell Ranch represented something worth preserving and studying. Bobby called Jennifer immediately, and she drove out that same evening. They sat at the kitchen table, reading through the grant details, making plans. "We could install rainwater collection systems," Jennifer said, her mind already racing ahead. "Improve the pasture management, maybe experiment with some native grass species that are more drought-resistant. Your mother would be so proud of you," Bobby said quietly. "The way you've taken hold of this, made it yours, while still honoring what came before." Jennifer looked up, her eyes bright. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad. You didn't give up, even when it seemed hopeless. You kept going. I had help, more help than I deserved. You had exactly the help you deserved. Good people supporting a good man facing bad circumstances. That's how it's supposed to work." In June, the ranch hosted its first agritourism event, a day in the life of a working ranch program for urban families wanting to expose their kids to agriculture. 20 families paid to spend a Saturday learning about cattle management, fence repair, water systems, and the daily rhythms of ranch life. Tyler led most of the activities, while Bobby shared stories about the ranch's history and Jennifer taught kids about large animal veterinary care. It was exhausting and chaotic and wonderful. Watching city kids encounter cattle up close, seeing parents genuinely interested in where their food came from, answering endless questions about ranch life, it reminded Bobby why this all mattered. The Caldwell Ranch wasn't just his legacy. It was a living connection to a way of life that was disappearing from modern America. By summer, the transformation was complete. The ranch was operating in the black for the first time in 3 years. The cattle herd had grown to 75 head of healthy, well-fed animals. The infrastructure was repaired and improved. Carlos and Miguel worked full-time again, and Tyler's innovative ideas were already showing results in improved grazing efficiency. On July 4th, the ranch hosted a community barbecue, Bobby's way of saying thank you to everyone who had helped. Over 300 people came, bringing side dishes and desserts, their kids running wild across the pastures, while adults swapped stories and played horseshoes. George Strait showed up unannounced, carrying his guitar and a case of beer. He ended up leading an impromptu jam session on the porch, with Bobby joining in on the songs he'd learned, fumbling through chord changes but grinning the whole time. As the sun set and fireworks began in the distance, the town of Bandera's official display, Bobby looked around at the scene. His ranch saved, his daughter thriving, his community celebrating together, Chester sleeping contentedly at his feet, the land his grandfather had claimed and his father had nurtured, continuing on. Jennifer found him there in the gathering dusk. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm better than okay," Bobby said truthfully. "I'm grateful. 6 months ago, I was standing here with no hope. Now," he gestured at the celebration around them, "now I've got more hope than I know what to do with." "What did you learn from all of this?" Bobby thought about it. "I learned that legacy isn't just about holding on to the past. It's about letting the past inform the future. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. I learned that communities matter, that people matter, that none of us gets through this life alone, no matter how much we might pretend otherwise." He paused, then added, "And I learned that your mama was right about a lot of things. She always said the most important things in life were people and relationships, not stuff and money. She was right. This ranch matters, but not because it's land and buildings. It matters because of what it represents: family, continuity, connection to something bigger than ourselves." Jennifer leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "I miss her." "Me too, sweetheart. Every single day. But I think she'd be happy about how this turned out. Not just the ranch being saved, but all of it. The community coming together, the new relationships we've built, the way we've opened up and let people in. That's what Patty always wanted. She hated how isolated we were out here sometimes, how I'd just put my head down and work instead of connecting with people. This whole experience, as terrible as parts of it were, it taught me what she already knew." The fireworks continued, bright bursts of color against the darkening sky. Music drifted from the porch where George and some others were still playing. Laughter echoed across the property. Life, in all its messy, beautiful complexity, was happening. Bobby Caldwell, who 6 months ago had been a man without hope, now stood on his saved ranch, surrounded by community, filled with gratitude, and looking toward a future that seemed not just survivable, but actually bright with possibility. The bank letter that had once promised to take everything was now just a bad memory, filed away with other documents from difficult times. In its place was something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that when good people face impossible odds, extraordinary things can happen. Communities can rally. Strangers can become friends. Hope can be reborn from the ashes of despair. And sometimes, just sometimes, a farmer who has lost all hope can find it again, not through his own efforts alone, but through the extraordinary act of others deciding he was worth saving. The Caldwell Ranch would continue for another generation, and maybe several more after that. The legacy William had started in 1947 would endure, adapted and strengthened by each generation that tended it. Bobby's story would become part of that legacy, a reminder that strength sometimes means accepting help, that community is the foundation of survival, and that the best of humanity emerges when people choose compassion over indifference. As the last firework faded and the guests began gathering their things, preparing to head home, Bobby said a quiet prayer of thanks. To God, to George Strait, to every person who had donated or attended or simply cared about a struggling rancher they'd never met. The drought would end. Markets would recover. Life would present new challenges, and Bobby would face them. But now he knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had his daughter, his community, his renewed faith in the essential goodness of people. And he had his ranch, the Caldwell Ranch, standing strong, ready for whatever the future might bring. 3 generations down, and counting. The legacy stood.